Hey, Bob. Okay, everyone, so we'll get started. My name is Dina Stevens. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director for the Federation of Ontario Public Libraries. With us today, we have Bob Molyneux. He is a librarian and our data analyst who prepares all of our data reports and the FOPL Dataset for us. So Bob will also be presenting with me today and giving you some wonderful information about the FOPL Dataset and the data that it's based on. So I want to just welcome you all to our session. We're informal here over at FOPL, so if you have questions as we go along, feel free to raise your hand. I am also presenting, so I may not see your hand immediately, and we can have a discussion as we go. And then there will be some time for question and answers at the end. So I'll give you a bit of an overview to start. We'll be talking about the FOPL data reports and the data set and what they are and how you can use them. Bob will give us a breakdown of the data itself and some examples from the reports. We can solicit some feedback that Bob is curious about for the 2020 data report. And I'll be talking about using this research for the purposes of advocacy in your public libraries. And of course, then we have time for questions. So firstly, what is the FOPL dataset? It differs from the FOPL data reports. The dataset is the Ontario's Ministry of Heritage, Tourism, Sport and Culture Industries compilated data on their annual survey. It's published data on Ontario's public libraries since 1999. The MHSTCI has data going back hundreds, decades for public libraries, but the data set itself is based on 20 years of data from the MHSTCI. The data set was created by recompiling the separate annual data that's published by the ministry. And it's been compiled into one continuous file. So it's very good at trend projection and seeing the growth of your particular library over the past 20 years. The series today, like I mentioned, has 20 years of data. It has from the year 2000 to 2019. 2020 data is forthcoming. The ministry just published it a couple months ago, and Bob is working diligently on that data. Using the data set, we can analyze performance of any single library in any of the years of the data and look at any of its like libraries. So it's very good at drawing comparisons between your library and some of your neighboring libraries or libraries that have similar population sizes or similar number of branches. We can manipulate the data and use it however we like. With the publication and distribution of FOPL's recompilation, there is now a very large, rich data set about Ontario's public libraries. Every year, when the new data is published, Bob adds to the data set and recompiles it. And that is recompiled into the FOPL data report. So the difference is that the FOPL data set is a set of data that you're able to manipulate it. And the report is an explanation of that data recompiled into tables and graphs to show trends and other important information that we might have. So Bob is going to take it away for us and talk a little bit about some of the data that we have in the data set and the report.
Dina, the PowerPoint's not showing.
It's not. Is it just
So,
me?
I can talk, but nobody's going to see the brilliant charts that I've done.
Interesting. Okay. But you can see me? Okay. How about now?
Nope.
No? Oh, do you know what the issue is? I forgot to share my screen.
There we go. Okay, so you got those two. The data set, library data, and I've worked with library data for much longer than any sensible person would, typically are published 1 year at a time. And to take the data sets, these 1 year files, and then recompile them into a longitudinal data set is sort of something I've become a specialist at, I guess. In any case, that's how you look at trends. And what you see here is the first draft. This is a draft of a table which is going to go in the FOPL report, because obviously the big news this year is the pandemic. And so the question is, the major question before us right now is to figure out what's going on, what has gone on, and to try to glean from that what will go on. And this table, in fact, I'm redoing this table right now because Sean McDonough at Markham came up with really just an extraordinarily good idea of something that I missed. And so in the process of implementing his brilliant ideas, I found out that I had an error in my program. So anyway, I'm redoing it. But I think in general, if you look at this table here, I don't think anything that you're looking at is going to be much of a surprise for us. Circulations are down. People are walking into the library less. The trend, we'll look in just a second, we'll look at charts of some of these so that you can get, for the people who like charts, can see the data graphically. But the expenditure figures continue a trend that has gone on for quite some time and has been reported in the FOPL Data Report for some years now. Electronic materials are going up, and expenditures for general materials are going down. And the ministry, which publishes the annual data, makes the distinction they make is pretty clear. You can look at the definitions, and they are separating, say, what we might call hardcover from digital materials. Programs offered went down, program attendance went down. That's not a surprise. Electronic learning courses went up, which is scarcely a surprise either. Now, as one of the things I did when I started looking at these data, I went out and I got all the 2020 data I could find from public libraries. And I looked, I've got Australia, I've got 2 US states. US will not be publishing its 2020 data until the spring of 2022. And Alberta. They all show the same thing you see here. The circulations are down. People are not walking in the door. Visits are down. You'll see the visits here in a second. And as dramatic as some of these numbers are, I think we can reasonably expect it. So people are not going to the library, but they're using libraries in other ways. I've said many times, and Dina's going to fall asleep here when I say this again, but one of the things that, a question that has occurred to me is, if we had known 10 years ago this was going to happen, what would we have done differently? And it seems to me that libraries, I mean, it's not a bed of roses, but I mean, the thing is that we are in better shape than we might have been 20 years ago. So, so we have alternatives. And so if you go to the next one, Dina. That's pretty dramatic, isn't it? Now, one of the things that the last reports have celebrated is we kind of have a conundrum. In general, there are few people that have cards that are called active card holders, as the ministry terms them, and so we have these things like search per capita goes down. And it's been wobbly, but it's not been something to celebrate. And I've thought that in general there are things, traditional things, which are you know, where the libraries are changing, and traditional things which are falling, but which we can measure exquisitely. And or I shouldn't say exquisitely better, but there are many new things, or some things are growing, and some of them we can't measure too well. But programs is a traditional thing. The ministry has a short history of the of Ontario library data. It's very short. I'd love to get at them, but the earliest numbers they have include programs. So this has been a continuing upward trend, and it's been up until this year. But what we're measuring here is people walking in the door. They are showing up in the library and they're taking classes. So the program's going up, attendance going up. This has been something to be celebrated, and then boom, we got this. So on to the next one, if you would.
I just wanted to also add that we came to the realization that this is something like this program attendance, when we pivoted to a virtual programming during the pandemic, there's the issue of reporting libraries. So some libraries closed altogether and some libraries were able to offer virtual programming. But how that programming is counted may vary from library to library, whether or not they started counting that as a social media interaction, if programs were hosted on their social media platforms, or whether they were only counting interactions with their more interactive programs online, like book clubs. And so with those kinds of new variables, there could be significant variance in the data that's collected in the pandemic year because of how libraries were collecting that data, how they decided to report on what program attendance is, and what they decided, you know, what is a social media visit versus what is a program attendance. And then of course there's the variable of, you know, of these 444 libraries, who was closed and who was operating online and that kind of thing. So I think what we can take from something like this is the growing trends, and then the trend for recovery after the pandemic.
These are aggregate figures we see here, as Dina says, and one of the things that I do in some of these aggregate, it depends on what I'm doing, is I print out the data from all libraries and I look at all libraries, and there's a lot going on under the surface. And what I'm giving you here is the big picture, because I think it's the first thing you would do anyway, and it is also a useful thing for, I would think, for lobbying and advocacy, to just get the big picture. And then, but you will find counter trends. For instance, one of them is a search per capita going down. There's some libraries that's going up, and there are some libraries that were the people that are active card holders, as the ministry calls them, is going up, while the general trend is down. So there are a lot of nuances. I mean, I think essentially what Dina was getting at. But here, this chart right here is is not too much different from what we've seen in recent years, with the exception of, as you see, in the last year, there's been a big change, because obviously librarians are sitting around and responding to the changes. And you can see by the slope of those two curves that it was a dramatic change this year. And I would say that indicates a quick response.
Mhm.
Did somebody say something? No. Okay, now the next one is visits. This is one of my favorite charts. 2 years ago, in the report, I think it was the first time, the second time I saw this chart, and I thought, boy, this is really interesting, because look what's going on. Now let's start over on the left side of the screen. That's the year 2000. And so on the vertical axis, we have visits by type. Well, what does that mean? So we have visits, people walking in the door, and that's the kind of blue line through across the center. And you can see that it's very steady. It goes up, it goes down, but it's steady. If you looked at the US data bends down, aggregate data for all states or all libraries. So it would seem the Ontario experience is different, and certainly if you look at the search per capita, that would be what you would infer. Now you'll notice down at that lower at 2000, below 500,000 on the left hand side, what you see there is web visits. So it's called electronic visits, but it's web visits. And one of the things that Steve and I did an article about for PLQ, Public Library Quarterly, was based on the Ontario data and how it measures more things than any other data series, more things than the US data, and it measures new things faster. So in other words, it gives us a sight into the future that I believe comparative library data might be a useful thing. Maybe the Australian libraries are measuring something you're interested in. But in any case, we have web visits here, and the US didn't start measuring that until last year. So the web visits start out much below the visits by type. So in year 2000, more people are walking in the door than they're checking the web. And then about 2009, they cross. And they bump around a little bit, and you always have a little bit wavering in data measurement, stuff like that, and it just keeps on getting up. So it's not that people stop going in, like apparently they did in the States, but what they did was they added to it. So now I don't have to go down to the library and I have to park the car and go in order to check out a book or renew or whatever like that. So it obviously was convenient. And it's another arrow in the quiver. And obviously in the year 2020, it took off. Now, here it is, okay. And then the in-person visits, of course, dropped in 2000 or 2020, and web visits shot up. Now, the little green line down there is the one that was growing the fastest. This is social media. This is Facebook and Twitter, and the alternate means that many libraries are using to reach their resident users. And actually, of course, another thing is that these electronic things are used for libraries. I've said this before, but I think what happens is that people, when they're getting ready to take a vacation, there are people who look at the library and to see what's going on there, because it's one of the things, the business about checking out skis and stuff like that. Libraries do that, and you think, well, look if they check out skis. But in any case, the social media visits was the fastest growing thing. So what we have is the steady circulations, people walking in the door, steady visits, stuff like that, and then we have the fast growing web visits, and then we had starting later but overtaking, and then we had the even faster social media measuring. And I understand it was a very complicated thing to collect, and it was not recorded this year. So that's what you see there is what we have. I was honestly, I was waiting to see this number this year when it wasn't there.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate. And like Bob said before, if we had known maybe 10 years ago or even 2 years ago what was going to happen in 2020 with the pandemic, having these social media numbers would have been, I mean, it would have been amazing to continue to include that data. I'm not sure how many of you know, the MHSTCI decided to stop collecting these social media typical week visits based on feedback from libraries that it was very cumbersome to collect. However, if we had known that we would be in the pandemic and we would then move to using social media so heavily, at some of our libraries would move to using social media so heavily for customer engagement, for programming, for anything really that happened during the pandemic. I think that perhaps we would have, and they would have chosen to keep collecting this information. I tried to have the best understanding of what information would be most helpful to our membership, and in speaking with the ministry staff at the MHSTCI, this was a decision that they heard from their members. So I mean, unfortunately, we don't have this information. It would have been amazing to see that skyrocket again, but unfortunately, hindsight, right?
Can't collect everything. Can't collect everything. I mentioned that the Ontario Library Data is the largest public library data collection that I'm aware of. And since I believe I'm aware of all of them, and I have them on my computers. Think about what that means. There are 435 variables ever collected by the ministry, and this year there were 300 and some. There's a thing called responder burden, and a responder burden is when the form is too long, people don't answer everything, or they skip things, or they answer some in the beginning and they answer some in the end, or they lie, or excuse me, make things up. And sometimes they make things up that are unreasonable, and sometimes they make things up. Sometimes a good librarian is going to have a pretty good idea, I think, about many things. Now, my mother was a public librarian at a small public library in Virginia, and I think about her, and non-numerate. I must say she's been shocked. She was shocked by what her two children did. But I think about her sitting there running her library, and it was a very good library. She's the best read person I ever knew. She could talk about anything. And one day somebody came in and started talking about detective novels. She started talking about detective novels. When did you read a detective novel? But in any case, so she knows books, she knows her way around the library, and she runs a good library, and it's a happy hopping place. And then she gets this form. It's got 300 questions in it. Oh my word. So I think about those people. I would like perfect data. Everybody would like perfect data, but they do not exist in this world since the Garden of Eden. So we deal with what we do. And I think it should be a practical thing, not a theoretical thing. And so I understand people responding to the burden. As a data analyst, I'm not happy about it, but I think as a librarian, you got to do what you got to do. So anyway, there was a question there. I had a question on the chat about percents. Yes, that's a summary table. The data. Well, I think I can put them in. In fact, the raw file that produces that table has percents in it. So it'll be a question of space. Well, I'll do that. I'm going to take a look at the table here just a second. I want to go back and look at it. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Now this table is these are the data behind the chart you just saw, and that yellow mark in the middle is to indicate it isn't there. So this is typical week data. What is typical week data? What are typical week data? It is a way of cutting down the responder burden is to pick some variables that are only collected 1 week, pick a typical week. And there are a lot of reasons to mistrust them. What if every year you happen to pick the best week as the typical week? I don't know how that sounds. It's always handled some way. But in any case, the data in this table are the typical week data. So in the year 2000, number of visits to the library made in person. What that is the sum across all the libraries, and there were 430 libraries that year, across all libraries of visits walking in the door for 1 week. Now, and similarly, all the places, electronic visits, this would be website visits in 2000, so 238,000. And in 2020, it's 2 million. And you can, and there's the in-person visits dropping from 1.5 million to 450,000. And then the social media. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about reference transactions. I've made the point several times in the FOPL report that we hear all this business about we got Google, we don't need libraries. During the middle of the pandemic, the typical best number we have for the number of people who walked in a library in Ontario to ask a question is 40,546. And the electronic transactions were 4,800. Now think about that. So they're doing something when they come to these libraries, and Google or not, there are things that we are doing that they can't do, that Google can't do. But even so, the reference transactions dropped. You notice that the fewer people came in, it's down about half. And the electronic reference transactions didn't go up that much. I'm curious about this number. I have a sneaking suspicion that when I get finished redoing the updates because of Sean McDonough's suggestion, I have a feeling that's going to go up. I mean, it seems like it's so typical of all the other libraries. It was kind of odd to me that it dropped, but it has been kind of a downward trend, like from the high in 2010 and thereabouts. So anyway, we'll see about that. Now, what's next? Now, notice down at the bottom what we have. We have the total 2000 to 2020, so that's 21 years. And so the number of visits made to the library weekly average, typical week, is 28 million, and so forth. We'll go across all the way. Now, I don't include reference transactions in the total because they're already in visits. They're already counted as visits. And of course, there's a kind of a metaphysical aspect to visits. I have a cat walking on the field. This is my data cat. Come on, kitty. So she's going to sit in my lap. See the tail? She's a beautiful cat. So we have the total, the weekly average. Now, how do you? We want an annual estimate to get a notion of how much is really going on. And so the ministry has a suggestion. What they do is they suggest multiplying by 50. They figure vacations and stuff like that. So multiply by 50. So the estimated total is the blue line. So the purple line is the sum of the typical week, and then the blue line underneath that is an annual estimate, a sum of the annual estimates to get an idea of how many people, say, walked in the library from 2000 to 2020. So that comes up to 1.4 billion. That's a lot of people. And this gets back to my thing about Google. Those people came into the library for a reason. I hope this detail is not detracting. She's so beautiful. She wants you to know that. And then the number of electronic visits is 1.5 million. So that's a lot of people. That's, I guess, the point of that thing. So I don't think we should ever be ashamed of, oh, Google this, that, or anything like that. Those people are coming to the library for some reason, and they're coming in for a lot more reason than to pick up a book. Now, that said, Dean has already heard this story, but one of the things that my mother was a book person, well, we all were, but one of the things that when I think it was the Atlanta Public Library, but she found out the Atlanta Public Library, whoever it was lending tools. books, libraries are for books. Well, rest your soul. Any case, on to the next one. This is a table of contents. This is as of this, as of now.
Mhm. So Bob, we can talk a little bit about this at the end. We can go back to the table of contents when we've got questions. So I think maybe we can talk about the table of contents after we talk a little bit more about the reports.
Okay.
Just being conscious of the time. I wanted to talk to everyone a little bit about using the data for the purposes of advocacy and using the research on a provincial level, using the comparisons and tables that show the effects of public libraries as a whole in Ontario for your own advocacy within your municipalities. So FOPL's annual data reports pull from the data set, and it presents the most current projection of trends. But the big question is, we've got this 100-page report, but what can we do with all of this great data? Essentially, it's most powerfully a tool for communicating the value and impact of public libraries. It can show our growth as a sector on a whole, and it can portray our value impact that's neatly graphed for your use. And as members of FOPL, you have access to our data reports as well as the FOPL Dataset. So it's really there for you to make use of as you see fit. And it shows not just our value impact, but it can show the value in all of the various manners that we have. For example, it shows growing collections and dynamic collections that adapt to digital formats over the years. It shows growing digital access, growing buildings as in number of brick and mortar, growing programs and program attendance, growing visitors and gate counts, including electronic visits, growing the partnerships and with all manners of organizations in the community, and growing maker movements for play, hobbies, business, education, and STEM initiatives. So overall, the data portrays, it paints a picture of growth for the public library sector, but all of this growth requires money. And as we know, the provincial libraries operating grants hasn't moved very much in the past 20 years. So we have to rely more and more on municipal funding for our libraries and to fund all of these great things that we do. So we know our value proposition is strong. However, it's not always reflected in that advocacy work. And we can use the tables and information from the data reports to visually represent the value impact with statistics. So I always like to talk about our excellent return on investment, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later. We have a strong position for economic development. And especially now, as we get into that pandemic echo, we should be positioning ourselves to show how we contribute to the fiscal and economic recovery of our province. In a meeting that I had in conjunction with OLA a few weeks ago with the Deputy Minister, we were talking about our government relations priorities and how we can position ourselves for success so that we can keep libraries at the table in conversation for our budget asks going into the next provincial election. And he really advised us to frame our budget asks for the next provincial election surrounding the priorities in context of fiscal and economic recovery, because that is really what the province is going to be the most focused on. And we know that libraries contribute to this. We just need to show how. And so I think that the data report is one way that we can help to tell that story and leverage what we can do in that respect to benefit us overall. Libraries have great employment support. We have provable early literacy development, ongoing support for formal education and homework help, which is especially important now since we have, such a thing exists going forward as, virtual education for elementary, high school, and university students. More and more you see, this year, university students who live in Thunder Bay are attending the University of Western Ontario remotely, something which probably might not have been possible for them financially in the past. So there are good things that have come out of the pandemic, and obviously not so great things. I always like to try to be optimistic, but the impact that the library can have, especially now, it needs to be measured, and the influence needs to be qualified, and the scope needs to be determined. And you can help do that with the data set that we have. The report on a whole is unimpressive. It shows an impressive impact of Ontario's public libraries, and we can use that to make our case. So when we consider the scope, the full provincial scope of public libraries, it's astonishing. As I adjust my glasses in a very librarian-like manner, 99.34% of Ontarians have access to public library service. So if you're looking for a point of access for your citizenship, if you're looking for a place that everyone has access to, they need not look any further than the public library. And I think that's why we were so successful in the past with lobbying for broadband infrastructure access to our public libraries, because it's the easiest way to bring access to the most people simultaneously, is to bring it to the public libraries. Ontarians on average borrow 131 million items a year. So imagine the volume of that, and that's physical items and electronic items. And that's from 2000 to 2019, there has been a total circulation of 2.38 billion items. And that number highlights how active libraries have been and remain in this span of 20 years. There's been an increase in uses per cardholder from 20 to 20.6 annually. So that's telling us that those who use us are finding an increasing number of ways to do so. And that's because of the increasing variety of things that we offer our customers. The use of our e-learning resources in the past 3 years that this data set has been collected, it really shows that the use of online learning resources like lynda.com, or now it's LinkedIn Learning, and Gale courses has increased by 39% in 3 years. And that's in number of courses taken. And that's just, as Bob showed us in a previous table, that's just skyrocketed in the past year with the pandemic closures. So that's just data from before the pandemic. And that's already 39% increase is huge. Libraries are clearly answering a need for lifelong education and upskilling in the digital economy. And as more people need and find these resources, the more important they'll become. One of the things I wanted to mention was a trend to watch, which is the number of active cardholders as a percentage overall in the population has remained stagnant for some time. So this is even though the population of Ontario has grown significantly. So this tells us that maybe we need to focus our efforts to remain robust and increase future impacts, because if our number of cardholders isn't growing, it can paint a different kind of picture of where we can focus our advocacy and maybe our outreach and marketing. I wanted to talk a little bit about this typical week data that Bob had showed us previously. Traditionally, the library services of in-person use has plateaued over time. As you can see, it's pretty stable. But this typical week graph shows engagement by visit type. And so we can see that, electronic and social media use has skyrocketed, and this can pave the foundation to make a case for increased funds for anything from marketing, website development, and even circulating devices such as tablets and e-readers, your non-traditional library items. It's a picture of adaptability and response to the needs of our customers, and it really does show how libraries have always been able to fill in the gaps of what our customers and what our communities need. And so within a very short period of time, we've been able to adapt. And just like in the pandemic, it really does show the library's flexibility and desire to meet the needs of its customers. I wanted to also talk a little bit about key ratios. So this is something that we focus on in our data reports. So our data reports show not only provincial data as our libraries as a whole in Ontario, but also we have key ratios, which focuses on individual libraries. So these are some key ratios to note. It's a little bit blurry, I'm sorry. It's literally a snippet from the data reports. So it's just listing the libraries alphabetically. So it was not meant to capture data for any particular libraries. So if you're from any of these libraries out there, I apologize. I didn't mean to single you out. But basically, some key ratios are things such as card holders as a percentage of your population. That could be a really interesting key ratio to use when leveraging for items for advocacy. Operating expenditures per capita, electronic material expenditures per card holder. Those are all really interesting ratios that you can leverage. This is just a sample, but we also have key ratios for your libraries that represent things like public access workstations per 5,000 of population, ebooks per capita, revenue from the provincial government or from your local government per capita. So that is actually a really interesting figure to show your municipal governments is, how is the money that they're giving the public library impacting one citizen per capita, right? So that can tell a really interesting story as well. We also do something that is a ranking order table. This, what we do is we rank libraries by band, and the band that your library is placed into is reflective of the population size you serve. So this is our highest band. This is band 1, highest meaning the largest population served. So this is resident population greater than 250,000. So there are 9 libraries that fall within this band. So if you think about how many libraries we have in Ontario, I think it's over 440 library systems that we have in Ontario. This only represents 9 libraries, and only 9 of those libraries is serves a population of over 250,000. So here you can see electronic materials expenditures per capita. Now this was 2019 data. This is what was published in the 2019 data report. Every year these rankings change. So every year as fundings fluctuate, as your library decides to put emphasis on one area of the budget over the other, these numbers fluctuate. So in the 2019 report, Vaughan had the highest electronic material expenditure per capita. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you have the most funding or the largest population that you'll be spending the most money in the same places. This is one of those anomalies as well, where Ottawa reported a 0. This is most likely an error, but this is what they reported. So it unfortunately results in a ninth place for Ottawa, but I think that changed for them in 2020, right, Bob? I think they were like in number 4 in 2020.
The 2020 number, I think, is like 247, I think it was. I looked it up yesterday, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah.
But let me chime in here just a second. One of the things about these 9 largest libraries, that very consistently, and it was 8 libraries just a few years ago, but these 9 libraries, they check out 53% of the books by numbers. They spend 50-some% of the money on materials, on total expenditures. So they are over half of the numerical output of as measured by the ministry data. Now, what that means then is that there are 290 small libraries that do the rest of it. And I'm particularly interested in the small libraries. And see, what we're doing is we're looking at the aggregates right here. So I'm going to tell you the aggregate visits were down but mostly what you're looking at the large libraries. And I think it would be very interesting to look at the smaller libraries, but that will be something that would have to come afterwards. You got to look at the big stuff and the First Nations libraries too. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay. So what I just wanted to point out here lastly is that these rankings only show the comparisons to your peer libraries according to population size. So it doesn't show rankings based on your comparative peers, which are there geographically, or peers that you may consider your peers for other reasons. For example, other peer county libraries or other peer First Nation libraries, or to that vein. It really just has to do with size. FOPL does offer a peer comparison report service where we will prepare custom reports using 3 years of data and how you compare and rank with peers of your choosing, as well as what is considered influencer libraries, which are one of these 9 libraries here. So this can paint a different kind of picture, or it can be used to give the message that you want to tell for your library. It can be really,
it's one message, because one of the things, the rank order tables, there are 2 sets of rank order tables, and those are in alphabetical order by the name of the library. And there are, I don't know, I guess 40 ratios, probably more than that. But if you wanted to compare your library with another library, that would be a way of doing it. One of the places that actually came from what I think is the most popular product of the U.S. Library Data Series, and the long history of library data, and there is a long history. Always one of the major things that librarians do with their data is compare themselves to other libraries, and so obviously we have to make it possible to do that, and we've got the data to do it, and that's what we do.
So I, would like to open up the floor to any questions or suggestions. Again, FOPL prepares our data reports and our data set based on the needs of its members. So if you feel that other kinds of data would be useful, more useful, if you have suggestions, we would gladly take it. I just want to go back up to the table of contents that Bob had put in here earlier, because this gives us an idea of exactly the kind of data we collect in the data report and that we publish. So as you can see, we have our provincial data here, which focuses on population and cardholders and circulation statistics and program statistics. But then we also have our key ratios and our rank order tables here as well. So again, if you would like to make any suggestions, if you have any questions, that's wonderful. If not, that's okay too. We threw a lot of numbers at you, and that's okay. Feel free to email me or give me a call afterwards if something percolates later on. That's great. I can put my contact information up on the screen here. The 2019 data report is available on the member section of our website. So you're able to log in and retrieve that in PDF. If you would like a copy of the data set, I don't leave it up on the membership area of the website because it has to remain in Excel format, and it's too easy to be, it's too easy for the data to get mixed up, and weird things happen in the ether of the internet. So it's strange things have happened to it in the past. So if you'd like a copy of the data set, just email me and I can email that directly to you to ensure that it hasn't been tampered with in any way as it makes its way over to you over the internet. So, and any questions or comments that you have for me now or later, or for Bob? All right, well, it doesn't sound like anyone's has any questions for us.
They're all so excited that they just can't control themselves.
No, I think it's more food for thought or
Yes.
processing. So
Yeah.
very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things that we're nearing the end of the preparation of the report. And so Dean and I chatted and said, we're going to wait a week or 10 days just in case anybody comes up with anything, because this is recorded and some people might listen to it and have ideas. And like I said, Sean's idea was just like dynamite. It's like, how in the world did I miss that? And I think that's going to be a great contribution to the members, particularly for advocacy, I think.
Okay, so if everyone is good to go, thank you for your time, everyone. It was wonderful to see some of the faces that I've been emailing with over the past 4 months. If you have any questions or comments afterwards, or you would like to just reach out for a chat, I'm always happy to talk to our member libraries and their delegates. So send me an email or send me a call, give me a call. I'm available for you. Okay, so everyone, thanks very much for attending, and we'll see you all again later, hopefully.
Good. Bye.
Bye, everyone.